It was as simple as reading an article about how the founder of Spotify wanted to go buy Arsenal because he was an Arsenal fan.
Really?
One of my favorite things is when everybody says there's no way that that will ever happen. I like ambitious challenges. I mean, we would make 80 to 100 phone calls every day. You know, I think I got very comfortable being turned down over and over and over again.
Resilience?
It was MasterCard's naming rights of the McLaren.
How much was that?
Certainly in the 9-figure range. I would probably peg it between 20 to 30 million a year.
Welcome to Gameplan, a podcast where you're going to be meeting athletes, business owners, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. I'm Kyle Phillip, and I'm going to be your host. What is your game plan?
On this week's episode, Matt Wiener.
So we are here today with the $100 million deal maker. He started his career very young. He's still very young, I would say. Matt Wiener, welcome to Gameplan. How are you?
I'm good. I feel older than I probably am on my birth certificate.
You're a millennial, right?
I guess so.
That's what they say.
Although having young kids ages you up pretty quickly.
You have two?
Yeah, almost 2-year-old, almost 4-year-old.
Wow, I know the feeling. It makes you. I heard somewhere that when you have kids, you hustle harder because you cannot waste time, right? So how do you make a big tech like Spotify to name an arena in Europe like Barcelona? How did you get that?
One of my favorite things is when everybody says there's no way that that will ever happen. And so when everything is net new in the sense of someone like Spotify, a big tech player, never done anything in the sports industry, right? Never done anything in brand, never done anything in sponsorship.
And one could say they don't need it.
They don't need it. And so you hear that all the time. I like ambitious challenges. And I think that in that sense, what you forget is, why do people do these deals? Some people do it for the branding. Some people do it for the notoriety. Some people do it because they're launching a new product. But ultimately, what they're really trying to do is align the deep-rooted values and the significance of something that is a unifier. So especially when you're talking about global IP. So the brilliance of the Spotify Barcelona deal was it brought together a global rights holder, Football Club Barcelona. Their universal language is football. That universal language is transferable across border, across language, across culture,
music,
and also is a pretty reasonable price point, right? It's not a barrier to entry to go on the pitch, or we could probably go set up a football game, a soccer game on the beach in Miami, without much of anything. We could probably go grab some strangers who we just met to go play with us. And then the universal translation of Spotify is music. You go to China, you go to Brazil, and you hear American singers singing American songs, and you hear Brazilians or Chinese or whoever is local to that culture on a karaoke machine singing those songs in English. So that unifying language of music and sport, in this case soccer, football, as they say globally, brought together two pretty impactful organizations. I think, how do you then discover that? How do you then go open the door to it? So that's the fundamental vision and alignment. It was as simple as reading an article about how the founder of Spotify wanted to go buy Arsenal because he was an Arsenal fan.
Really? But that was Emirates already, right?
Well, I mean, Arsenal is owned by the Glazers, right? The Glazer family here in the U.S. They own the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But if you work in the industry, there's no way that Spotify as a brand can go actually buy and own the team.
Like Red Bull?
Like Red Bull owns and operates teams, but in the sense of Spotify coming and owning a team. And so we knew he was a fan of football. So all we did was send an email and say, hey, maybe you can't buy a football club, but let us talk to you about a big idea, because clearly there's some interest in, and it starts with the discovery. It starts with...
Why Barcelona? Because you had a deal with Barcelona, so it was the perfect pitch.
I also think that when you look at the democratization of music,
Yep.
which is ultimately what Spotify was like some of their founding principles. So there's a universal language in music, and then there's the democratization of it. How do you bring it to people around the world? There's no other football club around the world as unifying as Football Club Barcelona from a democratization standpoint. Why? Because they're owned by the community.
Right.
And that ultimately is the recipe, right? Because then you have the right vision, you have the right core values, and then you figure out the business. And the business piece here is unique because in the case of Spotify, they wanted to do a couple things, right? They needed to embed themselves with the artists.
Right.
And they also needed to enter and penetrate other markets. Barcelona has a very captive audience around the world. In addition to that, they also have a pretty highly visible asset, which is the jersey,
Right.
coupled with a new stadium, which is the new stadium, Spotify, Camp Nou. And in Camp Nou, you have a renovation project. So you have a net new stadium linked with a highly visible asset, the jersey. And
Right.
that jersey then became a canvas for Spotify to share their story, but also share their artist stories around the world.
Is there any deal that you were not part of? When you see that, you're like, wow, that is a home run. That is a deal that I would love to be involved, that I really admire.
One actually that's fairly recent is actually, I think it was announced maybe even last week. And I saw it, and I know I have friends who are attached to the deal, but I don't have any of this on the record. But it was MasterCard's naming rights of the McLaren F1 team.
How much was that?
Orders of magnitude, but certainly in the 9-figure range in total. I would probably peg it between 20 to 30 million a year, at least. And what is unique about that is, as you think about like the MasterCard, MasterCard doesn't need brand awareness, right? A brand like a household credit card name, and they have deals with all different league rights holders all around the world.
The banks as well,
they have everything. But I thought in McLaren, they're a household name.
Right.
They've done tremendous. But the creativity behind that deal is the ability for MasterCard to take that as an issuer and go effectively share that with pass-through rights around the world. Because F1 is a traveling circus, right? They can set up in all these different markets. McLaren has global rights, so they have their ability to leverage their global rights. Anywhere McLaren shows up, MasterCard shows up. Most likely, a lot of the races where Formula One is taking place, MasterCard can come to their local banking partner. Most banks are regional, so most banks have specific states or countries in mind. And that allows MasterCard to go leverage the naming rights deal that they have, where they don't need brand notoriety. They're not doing it for the brand placement. What they're doing it for is to better embed themselves with these local banks in different markets. And I thought that was a really brilliant one.
So it's a B2B deal, in a world where you're going to have billions of, eyeballs. How do you measure ROI in a deal like that, or in a naming rights deal? And that's probably the billion-dollar question, right? Because think about MasterCard. How do you justify $100 billion, $100 million just to socialize with, and I'm putting this in a practical way, to socialize with local banks? How do you measure that? And I know you have a concept for that, right?
I mean, I have a few different, secrets or tips and tricks, but I think ultimately people fixate on these highly visible things as assets, right? The way you would buy a home.
Yep.
And then you completely lose the emotion, right? It tries to become a science. It's not a science. If it was a science, or said better, if it was something that you could automate, then neither of us would probably have jobs. And, a number of the people on the podcast probably, would have to reconfigure their jobs. It's not an exact science. And because it's not an exact science, you need to figure out the other avenues and the other mechanisms to make the totality of an opportunity attractive. And that's top down. That's a vertically integrated relationship. And I always use the framing of I view partnerships, and I don't ever say the S word, sponsorship. It's something fundamental. Mm-hmm. I've embedded it into my DNA. It's always a partnership.
Not sponsorship.
It's always a partnership.
It is a partnership. You're coming with the asset or the value, and
if you view a partnership like an investment banker, and I always use the term investment banking in the investment bankers of marketing, right? So as investment bankers in the marketing world, an investment banker would approach an M&A transaction looking at the totality of a company before they buy a company. in this sense, you really have to look at the totality of an asset, align that totality of an asset with the totality of a buyer, the
Right.
brand that's going to put their name on the asset.
But you're going to add value to the whole thing.
How you're going to add value to the
Yep.
whole thing. And every partner has a different mechanism, a different KPI, a different ROI measurement. And so as you think about that investment banking thesis in the marketing world, you start to realize that it's much deeper than just CPMs or impressions or the traditional way that, you know, transactional sponsorship has been done. And frankly, like if you do that, you're looking at probably a shorter term duration. You're not creating stickiness, and you're not getting back to the Spotify deal with Barcelona or the MasterCard deal with McLaren. You're not thinking about the fundamental attributes that really will sustain the longevity of a partnership. And I always say, you know, it's important that you have a win-win-win type of deal. And that means the buyer needs to win.
Right.
The seller needs to win. So the brand who's buying needs to win. The seller, the property, the IP owner needs to win.
Of course.
And ultimately, the customer, that
The people,
the
who's gonna
fan,
use-
the IP owner are going to touch with this overall partnership, they need to win. So by creating that trifecta, the people who are actually coming to a stadium or coming to watch a football club play,
Right.
they need to buy that jersey. They need to feel compelled to go to that stadium and have an amazing experience, even if that team isn't performing right on the pitch,
Right.
even if that team doesn't have a celebrity on the pitch, even if
All
that
the
sport
community.
that sport might not be their favorite, right?
Yeah.
It's about the community, it's about the experience.
Yeah.
And if you can win for the brand and you can win for the property and you can win for the customer, then that's the trifecta.
No, for sure, and I agree with you. I think there is, if that, you know, the ROI is there. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many brands. Those MasterCard deals, you know, those $100 million deals like you're used to. Well, let's talk about that.
By the way, they're going up. They're not just $100 million deals anymore.
So you are building the Miami Freedom Park, which is remains unnamed or remains named as Miami Freedom Park temporary. It's going to be at 25,000 seats. It's going to host the City Hall of Miami. The mayor is moving his City Hall to that area. It's in an amazing location right by the airport. How do you feel about that? How exciting is that for you?
Oh, I mean, it could not be a better, it could not be a more inspiring project for a region
Yep.
in the center of a city that is representative of not just the region, but also, frankly, several different countries,
Yep.
if not the capital of Latin America, as we like to say here in Miami. And the project itself is not just, it's anchored, of course, in Inter Miami's new stadium, which will be a 25,000 seat stadium, opening in the spring of 2026. But it's about the city within the city that we're creating right in the center of Miami.
What's going
What
to have
that
there? There's going to be
includes is
restaurants.
Restaurants, retail, offices, hotels, concert venue, multi-dimensional experiences that will attract people on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. or a Saturday night watching Inter Miami play on the pitch, right next to one of the most international airports in a
Yep.
booming city that's multicultural. And one of our thoughts there was, you know, one of the fundamental things that's important to Inter Miami's ownership group is the freedom to dream, and the freedom to dream meaning the freedom to create, the freedom to do things that have never been done before.
Yep.
And it's a multidimensional sports and entertainment ecosystem anchored by a very amazing, globally renowned football club,
Right.
soccer, as they say here in the U.S.
So you call soccer or football?
I you know, it depends on the audience that I have, but I can speak both languages.
Talking about soccer, I call soccer, by the way. You have Florida as probably the epicenter of soccer in America now. You just had the FIFA tournament over the summer, and
Yeah,
Florida
World Cup was amazing.
Florida was more successful than New York, right? I don't know why FIFA is here in Coral Gables, so we're nearby. They're probably like across the street, like we're gonna say hi. But it's definitely is a fact that Florida is more popular for soccer than the East Coast and the West Coast, obviously. You have Orlando with the Intercoastal Stadium, which is every weekend you also have 20,000 people, 25,000 people. Miami, obviously. So, do you think now soccer is becoming like a favorite sport in America, or do you think this is an encore experience from the 90s when you had Pelé and, World Cup. You really believe this is happening now, or is just a phase?
I took my almost 4-year-old, turning 4 in a couple of weeks, but I took her to the Brazil-U.S. women's national team match at SoFi Stadium.
Of course.
And I think not only was it one of the most fun experiences that I've had with my daughter, but also you look around and you see the attendance and the fans and the engagement. And I'm talking about the game that was in Los Angeles. And then you go to Miami and you go to New York, and you can say one city has more fans, or Orlando, one city has more fans than another. But I think that movement is very much a movement that's here for a permanent and long-term position. And you just look at youth participation in the U.S. and you look at people that are playing the game, and you, I think, have more competitive teams right here. And you look at the Orlando City in the Inter-Miami rivalry, right? And so you have a number of different mechanisms and the business side of soccer in the U.S. is growing. And then you have all the international teams that are investing. You have the international IP. It's not just FIFA. AFA, the Argentinian Football Federation, is here in Miami. And you have Telemundo, one of the big broadcasters, that's here in Miami. And so as you start to look out and you zoom at the overall landscape, not only do I hope, because I'm a fan of the sport broadly, you see long-term stickiness to the industry. And I think that, hopefully next year with 2026 and the FIFA World Cup, the Club World Cup was a great celebration here this past summer. I think it's going to be a very meaningful movement. And anyone who has the opportunity to, I think, should get involved in soccer.
It's interesting, right? Because the U.S. is so good in so many sports, but not in soccer. I mean, I'm not saying the U.S. is not good, but it's not like Europe or Spain or Brazil or Mexico or Argentina, obviously.
Soccer, America's a melting pot, and soccer as a sport is a melting pot. And I think, you hope, I grew up, born and raised in America, and I hope that our U.S. men's national team plays well in 2026. I'm an optimist, so let's say I'm more optimistic than most, but it is a melting pot, and I would be just as happy to go watch Football Club Barcelona play in the U.S. as seeing the U.S. national team or seeing Inter Miami play Orlando. So it's a melting pot, and I think hopefully the national team gets more competitive. The league, I think, has all the Major League Soccer professional
MLS
league.
is doing a great job.
MLS has all the mechanisms to be long-term, and I think they're making the right decisions to do it. And you have leaders like Inter Miami and NYCFC and LAFC,
Orlando
City, who are doing everything they can to make it a sustainable, excellent league.
And I think is in the development. It's developing, right? If soccer was a business in America, it would be in a growth mode. It is growing. If 10 years ago, Inter Miami is like 5 years old.
6 years old.
6 years old. Orlando City is, I think, has been in the
Inter Miami, 6 years old.
International in Miami, right?
International and they already have the third most followed sports franchise in the U.S.
It's tremendous.
The Lakers and the Warriors. It's crazy. So the movement, and I think that you have a lot of other places around the world paying attention to soccer here in the U.S., and that's why it's here to stay.
You started your career, and I was very curious about that, at SBE.
Uh-huh.
And of course, it's probably one of the best brands, or one of the most remarkable brands in hospitality in the last 20 years. You went there and you worked, you started in hospitality, and then you moved to sports ticketing. You were a killer. You were selling, I met people in the industry that says you were the best salesperson there, the Padres, right?
Uh-huh.
And
I think one of those guys has been on your podcast.
Oh, Jared, right? Yeah, he's a great guy for sure. He's a good friend. Well, he's one of them. What did hospitality taught you? Like what did you learn that on hospitality that you take to your life, and especially with SB Group?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate in going to school in Los Angeles. You had access to a number of unique internships, apprenticeships, jobs in college and out of college. And so I was fortunate to get to know some people in school, and then got an opportunity to work at SB Entertainment. They're the parent company to the SLS hotels.
Yep.
Katsuya, which is a very famous Japanese restaurant, and they've done a lot. I mean, big hotel developer, have a huge presence here in Miami as well, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think working first in hospitality taught me more than anything how important human interaction is, because so much of it is face to face, so much of it is in person, especially in the dining world, right? In the hospitality world, you're out to dinner, you're socializing with people. So you learn quickly not just how to have conversations in person and be yourself and be comfortable being yourself, but you get to see in real time how your product, in the case of SB, right, the restaurants and the nightclubs and the hotels, how the actual customer experience, and you're seeing it while you're also out participating in that experience.
Right.
So while you're dining, you see a customer next to you dining. But more than anything, I worked for really good people, and having that exposure early on taught me a lot, and I was very grateful for it.
And then you moved to San Diego, right? South California. And how was that? How was that move?
You know, it was, so actually, if you rewind, so I was at SB Entertainment, and then I moved. I liked the business, I liked the entertainment hustle, and then I got to know a guy named Casey Wasserman and a few of his team, and Casey is now the chairman of the LA 28 Olympic Games. And I was lucky enough to intern for Wasserman back when it was a very small company. And I got to do that because they started a sports and entertainment networking group at university.
Right.
And I did that intentionally so I can network with a number of professionals.
Were you playing any sports in university? Or
I played water polo, and growing up, I thought I was going to be a baseball player.
Really?
Learned quickly I wasn't.
Wow.
I probably should have gone into soccer, like body configuration and speed and everything else. You know, probably could have been a good soccer player, but I played water polo, and then played water polo in school. And then, you know, there's no professional career to be a water polo player.
Yeah.
Nor did I necessarily have the size to do it, but I love the hustle. I think playing sports competitively teaches you a lot, especially in a team format.
Yep.
And so from a team environment to a professional environment, especially at a very young age, you sort of learn on the job, and you know, in general, if you have good opportunities and people who are trusting you to go mess up, then you can kind of learn by doing, but also be okay failing. And so by failing, you kind of fail up. And so by failing up, you level up. And I got to meet really good people along the way. I started a sports and entertainment networking group. Through that, got to meet powerful people in the entertainment industry and the sports industry, did this internship at Wasserman, but specifically localized to this and this was back in the mid 2000s, but like 2000, so 2005, 2006. The early days of global partnerships, naming rights, stadiums, jerseys, right? Back when that as an asset class was not contemplated the way it is today.
It was not as valuable as...
It just wasn't... it wasn't as industry standard.
Well explored,
right?
as
it was net new. Everything that you were doing.
Who was doing that well at the time, like back in the days? What?
I mean, in European football was probably the most common because you had the jersey deals, right? And that was like more commonplace. Stadium naming rights started to come online. Wasserman was a pretty big leader at the time, and so I got to work on a couple projects. What was at the time New Meadowlands Stadium, which then became MetLife Stadium, which is in New York, Jets Giants, Emirates Stadium, which is Arsenal, Tottenham, their jersey partnership. So I got to, at a very young age, I got to work in a couple different varied experiences that taught me a lot. And that was, when I was doing that work at Wasserman, that became my calling. And then I had my North Star, which was, what can I do to go do this for my career? And that then led me to San Diego, where I worked in the Padres front office, because a mentor of mine told me that if I wanted to do that long term, I needed to go figure out how I could showcase my value in a sports organization.
Right.
The easiest way to do that is generate revenue. And so I said, how do I do that? He said, go sell tickets for a baseball team.
And was it hard? Because in baseball, you have over 100 games per year, right? In an arena.
You have 81 home games. You have 162 games.
Right.
Those games, there was no pitch clock. There was no shortened. So they were long games. and we weren't necessarily we were not up there in the standings. So
And what did you do to sell tickets? Because
I
as a salesperson, right, or as a
Yes.
commercial, how do you drive people to go to an arena when you're not the number one team and it's not the favored sports in town?
Yeah, so like I had an internal drive, which I knew what I was working towards long term.
Right.
And I knew what I needed to do to get there. And then fortunately, I worked for an organization, San Diego Padres front office, that invested significantly in revenue generation and the sales team. And so I started my career doing ticket sales. That was a mix of season tickets and group tickets and premium suites and so on, to a market that was not necessarily that excited about the sport, baseball, with a team that, I joke about this, but it teaches you a lot. We only had a winning record one day of 3 years that I worked down there. So 3 full seasons, we were 1-0, and our second season when we won an opening day. And that day, you kind of just learn by doing. I made 80 phone calls, and I said, I'm calling
Every day?
I mean, we would make 80 to 100 phone calls every day. My strategy was, how do I make 20 to 30 phone calls that are much more intentional in quality and drive value?
Right.
And I learned that early, but again, the metric was how many, like, pick up the phone, call as many people as you can. There was a multiplier effect.
Right.
It wasn't an exact science. I think I was always trying to be a little bit more progressive, right, from my early days in the industry. But that day when we had this opening day win and we were 1-0, the year before we finished in last place. That year we finished in last place. The year after we finished in last place. But that day we were 1-0, I made 80 phone calls. I called everyone on my phone sheet and I said, I'm calling on behalf of the undefeated first place San Diego Padres. But I think to answer the question of, like, how do you sell a product that
Right.
is not
The
so
favorite.
much team performance driven, or even in a market where,
Yep.
Miami, LA, San Diego, there's lots of activities to do, right? So you have the beach, you have outdoor
NBA, LA,
and you have competitive, right? At the time in San Diego, you had the NFL, the
Yep.
Chargers were down there. And so my focus was, how do I show and share an experience? And what I mean by that is, how do you go deliver an experience that will be essentially future-proof? Meaning,
Right.
if the team loses, you're still going to have a good time. You bring your kids to a game, even though the team...
It's an experience.
It's an experience, and you have to create and cultivate that experience. And that was, when I started my career, I was doing individual season ticket sales to personal people. It'd be like,
Right.
I would call you.
Say, hey, you
I'd
want
say,
to
hey,
buy? How much would
would-
cost? Like today's money is what? $20,000? No.
Yeah, I mean, I always aspired to sell the most premium, right? Because if you sold the most premium, then
You have the better experience, best experience.
Yeah,
now,
you have
right?
the best experience. You don't have to make 100 calls. You can probably make 20 calls.
Right.
In a day.
That's a very good sales advice, right? Go for the best so you can 80-20, right? You can commit to.
You absolutely get a lot more no's.
Yep.
But you have to get in. I think I got very comfortable being turned down over and over and over again.
Resilience. Let me ask you one thing. So you were talking.
But I would add to, I also would much rather prefer to call you as an executive at Intern Code and you as a family man. So I loved always the business language,
the network,
the intellectual curiosity that would drive.
But here we are. We are in Miami, in Coral Gables today, in the beautiful Gables. I can almost see that Freedom Park from here. It's getting more and more. Every time you go to the airport, you see the construction going on. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. It's fun, actually, when you fly out, depending on what side of the plane you're on, you can see the totality of this big project anchored by Inter Miami Stadium. It's going to be a bedrock of the community here. So it'll be terrific once it opens.
25,000 people, right?
Yeah, 25,000 seat stadium, planned to open next spring, 2026.
It's going to be in March?
Yep.
Amazing.
It's going to be fantastic.
But how is it going for you? You're from LA.
Yes.
And you've been coming and going nonstop. How is the commute going for you?
It's just an easy cross-country commute back and forth. I think LA is home. I love Los Angeles. I love California. Been in LA a long time, and but it's nice to have another home here in Miami. Coral Gables, I spend a lot of time. The Lowe's in Coral Gables, probably spent 50 nights there in the last year, and it's wonderful to be here.
Do you think Miami is like with the pandemic, obviously, and become like there was this boom in Miami? Do you really think that is becoming the new LA?
It's funny coming from LA to Miami. Everybody says there's this East Coast New York influence and bias. I think that there's a lot of similarities to LA. In Miami, no one likes taking public transport.
True.
You're on the water, and there's a general, I think, vibe of getting more in the epicenter of culture.
Right.
And it's different. Miami's got its unique attributes. LA's got its unique attributes. Food cuisine is excellent. There's
the
obviously
food better here or there?
I discover more and more some amazing places in Miami. It's a little bit different when I'm here.
Right.
My kids most of the time are with me, so
you bring
my dining out experience in Miami is different when I'm in Los Angeles than when I'm here in Miami.
But do you bring your kids here or no?
Yeah, they've been a couple of times. Can't wait to bring them to Miami Freedom Park.
You take them to Shake Shack.
Yeah, well, actually,
Factory.
the big one. A friend of mine has been hyping up the Disney cruises.
Right. Have you gone?
Not yet, but it's on the list. Maybe later this year.
I've done a few times, and I love Disney, and it's interesting when you have kids. Have you been to Aulani in Hawaii?
No, I've been.
You're in California, right? So.
I've been. Yeah, I mean, I'd say that one of the unique access parts of California is your proximity to Hawaii
and Asia as well. I would say that's what makes me want to move there. Is like Asia and Hawaii.
I have a Singapore trip in a couple of weeks, and I'm happy I'm not flying from the East Coast.
Right. Padres or Barcelona?
Barcelona.
Wow, that was quick.
Recency bias.
Stadium naming rights or music festivals?
As a fan, music festivals, stadium naming rights.
Which one is your favorite?
And butter. My favorite music festival, Burning Man.
Where did you go this year?
I went a couple of before kids.
So you're a burner?
Yes.
Wow. Would you take your kids? Because people are taking kids now, right? I'm like, what's going on?
I want to. I need to have the discussion at home with my wife.
Did she go with you or no?
She did.
Next year, if you're going, let me know. My wife said she's going to divorce me if I'm going, but I'm going to convince her.
A sneaky great music festival, by the way, is Lollapalooza. I got to work in the music business.
Chicago, right?
Yeah, in Chicago. They just it's warm, friendly people, great music, right in the center of the city.
No Coachella for you?
I've been a few times and staged. I've gotten my laps in.
Interesting.
I have my wristbands.
Building Miami ambition or expanding in Europe tradition?
Can I say both?
Sure.
Okay. Both.
You cannot, as a good
real.
business guy, you're never going to say no to Europe, obviously. There's always a charm, right? What's the best restaurant in LA for you?
Well, one of the OG restaurants is Bestia, downtown Los Angeles. To help reinvent an underdeveloped part of the area. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. There's Uncle Bill's by my house in Manhattan Beach. Makes great pancakes for the kids.
Interesting. What about the best in Miami?
Sonny's.
Sunny Steakhouse. You're the second person in this podcast to name Sunny Steakhouse. Back at the Galaxy or Messi in Miami?
Messi in Miami.
Come on.
Easy.
You're so biased. Matt, thank you so much for coming to Gameplan. And I have to ask you, what's your game plan? What is happening for you in the next 5 years?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So last fall, I started a new company. Company's called Jet Sports. We obviously launched with a pretty highly visible project with Inter Miami's new stadium in Miami Freedom Park. A lot of enthusiasm. I think I wanted to create a business that took the DNA of my view and philosophy of partnerships and then started to bring that partner ecosystem to different rights holders around the world. I think there's expansiveness, there's never, you talk about 5 years, the next decade, there's, billions and billions and billions of dollars in the US alone going into these stadium projects, these real estate development projects. I think that having true partnership views, not just to when you're out in the market doing partnerships, but actually understanding your end client, right? Could be an owner, it could be a buyer.
Yep.
Having real honesty throughout the process and transparency. And so I started this new company, Jet Sports, last year. Fired some great people. We have some big announcements along the way.
Interesting.
I plan to go into Europe. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Asia. Spending a lot of time these days in Latin America, and even here in Miami, there's never been, I like to say that this is the epicenter of culture and sport right now. There's a lot of investment coming to this market.
But not so many naming rights available there, right? There is not so many supply of.
Yeah, it's limited demand. It is,
right?
Supply and demand, ultimately, if, there's only so much supply, demand will only increase. But
right.
I would also say, it's not just about one single asset. It's
right.
about, and I mean, when I say partner ecosystem, I really mean it, because what you're trying to do is solve for the stadium, the underlying infrastructure, the technology, the beverages, the experiences. So you're creating a whole network effect. And I think if you have the right view on the naming asset, and then you bring a collection of other partners to the table, it's a very unique opportunity over the next 5 years, and that's where I want to take the business.
Matt, thank you so much for being at Gameplan, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Gameplan is brought to you by Inter, nearly 40 million clients around the Americas. You want to know more? Download Inter right now. Stay tuned for more.